Hi Brielle, it's Mommy. I just wanted to go ahead and make this video for you so that it would make it easier for you to do some of your homework today. I know that you liked when I read the first part of your social studies chapter on Monday when we were doing makeup work, so I thought I would go ahead and read what you needed for today. I'm going to review 10.3 and 10.4, which I'm sure you got to learn about on Tuesday when you went to school. Then we'll get into what they did on Wednesday and what they're doing on Thursday. So 10.3 says the Proclamation of 1763. After the French and Indian War, many British settlers moved west. They built homes on the land that Great Britain had won from the French. American Indians feared that this movement of people would destroy their way of life. Some American Indians tried to drive the settlers away by attacking their homes and the British forts. By the time this fighting ended, nearly 2,000 settlers, soldiers, and traders had died. To stop the attacks and to protect the colonists, Great Britain announced a law called the Proclamation of 1763. This proclamation declared that American Indians could have much of the land west of the Appalachian Mountains. It also said that settlers could not move to these areas. The colonists disliked this law. They did not like the way in which Great Britain was trying to control the colonies. Many colonists simply ignored the law and moved west. 10.4. The Quartering Act. The British government kept thousands of soldiers in North America after the French and Indian War. Great Britain wanted to protect its colonies and also keep them under close control. Great Britain wanted the colonists to help pay for the protection provided by its troops. In 1765, the British Parliament passed a new law called the Quartering Act. It ordered the colonists to provide quarters, or places to live, for British troops. Colonists also had to give the soldiers food, fuel, and transportation. The Quartering Act angered the colonists. They did not want to pay for British troops in the colonies. Therefore, many colonists treated the soldiers badly. All right, so this next part is what you guys did in class on Wednesday. So we're going to read 10.5 and 10.6. 10.5, the Stamp Act. After fighting the French and Indian War, Great Britain needed money to pay for its debts. It also had to pay for the army in the colonies. In 1765, to raise money, Parliament passed a new tax law called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act said that the colonists had to pay a tax on printed papers. Newspapers, pamphlets, marriage licenses, and playing cards were all taxed. When a colonist paid the tax, an official would mark the printed paper with a large stamp. This new tax angered the colonists. They did not want to pay more money for things they used every day. They did not want to pay another tax to the British government. But they were mostly angry because they had no say in making the law. Colonists showed their anger in many ways. Some colonists refused to buy the stamps. Some of them protested in the streets and town squares. And some tried to scare off the tax collectors. At times, groups of colonists even attacked the tax collectors and their homes. Groups from different colonies joined together in protest against the Stamp Act. In some colonies, merchants agreed not to buy any British goods. Many women, such as the Daughters of Liberty in Rhode Island, refused to buy British cloth. They wove their own cloth instead. In October of 1765, 9 colonies sent delegates to a special gathering in New York. This meeting became known as the Stamp Act Congress. The delegates thought that all British subjects had a right to vote on taxes through representatives. But the colonies had no representatives in Parliament. The delegates said that it was unfair for Parliament to pass tax laws like the Stamp Act. To them, such laws were an example of taxation without representation. The colonists' angry protests surprised King George III and Parliament. However, British leaders knew that they could not force the colonists to obey the Stamp Act. So in March of 1766, Parliament repealed the law. And repeal means to cancel or to undo it. But Parliament let the colonies know that it still believed in its right to tax them. In 1767, Parliament again passed tax laws to raise money from the colonies. These laws, called the Townshend Acts, taxed several goods that the colonies imported. Imported means that they brought them to the country. So these goods included lead, glass, paint, paper, and tea. In protest, the colonists again stopped buying British goods. 10.6. The Boston Massacre. In 1770, the colonists remained angry that British troops were living in their towns and cities. They thought that the soldiers were rowdy and rude. It was also upsetting to the colonists when soldiers took jobs away from them. The British soldiers could work for low pay in their spare time. The soldiers weren't content either. They were far from their homes, and the colonists' anger made their jobs more difficult. As time went on, the relationship between the soldiers and the colonists worsened. Things were especially tense in the city of Boston. The colonists showed their hatred for the soldiers by making fun of their red coats. They called them names like Lobsterback, and some soldiers went out of their way to annoy local citizens. Soon, name-calling and fistfights in the streets were common. In this picture down below, it says that Paul Revere's famous engraving shows his version of the Boston Massacre. In it, soldiers fire at a peaceful crowd. But that was not what actually happened. We'll continue reading. On the cold night of March 5th, 1770, violence erupted in Boston. A British soldier was standing guard at the customs house, a building where the disputed taxes were collected. A crowd began to gather. People called the soldiers names. Some of them threw stones and snowballs. Captain Thomas Preston and 7 other soldiers hurried to the guard's defense. They loaded their muskets, a type of gun. The crowd kept taunting the soldiers. The colonists threw more snowballs and chunks of ice. No one is sure about what happened next. Some people said that Captain Preston told his soldiers not to fire their guns, but one soldier thought that he heard the command, "Fire!" and he shot into the crowd. And when the crowd moved toward them, the soldiers panicked and they fired more shots. Within moments, 5 people lay dead or dying, and 6 more were wounded. The colonists called this tragic event the Boston Massacre. A silversmith named Paul Revere made an engraving, or an image etched into metal, of the massacre. The engraving shows soldiers firing at a peaceful crowd, although that was not what actually happened. And colonists shared news in letters or correspondence. colonial governments had begun to set up informal committees of correspondence in the 1760s. Members of these groups let one another know what was going on in their regions. Samuel Adams was a leader of protests against the British. He made sure that the news of the massacre spread throughout the colonies. In 1772, Adams helped form a permanent committee of correspondence in Massachusetts. This group wanted to unite the colonists to protest against British actions. Go ahead and pause the video and find the notes that Mrs. Hills sent to you. It says that she will send it to you on Teams into your notebook. You're going to copy it into your notebook. And then when you're finished, go ahead and unpause and we will do Thursday's work. Okay, so for Thursday, you have to read 10.7 and 10.8. 10.7, the Boston Tea Party. In response to the Boston Massacre, Parliament repealed all the taxes on the colonies except the tax on tea. Although the colonists loved tea, many boycotted it because of the tax. So boycott means to protest or just refuse to use or even buy it. The largest British tea company, the British East India Company, lost a great deal of money. To save the company, Parliament passed the Tea Act in 1773. It said that only this company could sell tea to the colonies. The British hoped to force the colonists to again buy British tea. The Tea Act did, in fact, lower the cost of tea, but the colonists were still angry. This was another unfair law passed without their approval, and they didn't like being forced to buy tea from only one company. What if Parliament decided to let certain companies control other imported items? Again, the colonists protested. Some spoke out. Others again boycotted tea. In Boston, some local citizens acted. On December 16, 1773, a group of men dressed as American Indians boarded ships in Boston Harbor. They opened 342 chests of tea and dumped the tea into the water. Afterwards, the colonists called this incident the Boston Tea Party. Soon, people began to sing about it in the colonies. Rally, Mohawks, an American Indian tribe, they sang. Bring out your axes and tell King George we'll pay no taxes on his foreign tea. But in Great Britain, people were shocked and angry, and King George was furious. 10.8. The Intolerable Acts. After the Boston Tea Party, Parliament passed several laws called the Coercive Acts. The British wanted to coerce or force the colonies to obey Great Britain. Many colonists said that they could not tolerate or accept these harsh laws. The colonists called these laws the Intolerable Acts. One law, the Boston Port Act, closed Boston Harbor. Trade ships could not enter or leave the harbor until Boston paid for the lost tea. Many workers lost their jobs. Some people feared that the citizens of Boston would starve. The other colonies helped by sending money, food, and supplies to Boston. In addition, in September 1774, the First Continental Congress was held. Leaders from every colony except Georgia met in Philadelphia. They discussed their complaints about Great Britain. The angry delegates agreed to fight against the Boston Port Act and the other intolerable acts. In summary, In this chapter, you read about some of the events from 1754 to the end of 1774 that created tension between the colonies and Great Britain. You used the metaphor of a parent and a child to describe this relationship. The British behaved like concerned parents who protected the colonists, their children, and Great Britain thought that the colonists should be grateful and respect British authority. But like growing children, the colonies wanted to have a greater role in making their own decisions. They did not like Great Britain's efforts to control them. When Great Britain ignored their complaints, the colonists protested, sometimes violently. By 1775, people on both sides were very angry. In the next pages, you will learn about King George III. He ruled Great Britain during this time. How did the king's personality and beliefs affect events in the colonies? Read on to find out. Okay, so now that we've finished 10.7 and 10.8, you're going to go ahead and the video will end, and then you will get to copy down notes that Miss Hills will send you about the Boston Tea Party and the Intolerable Acts. I also want to note that I'm not so sure I agree with their metaphor about the child being the colonists and Great Britain being the parent. I feel like the reason that it didn't work was because they're both parents. They're both adults. So even though the colonies were new, they were still being run by all adults. And there needed to be more of an understanding between one another rather than one trying to be the powerful totalitarian, the ruler, the one who made all the laws, that it should have been more of a group effort. All right. Well, have fun copying notes. Love you. Bye.